That is a shomer ne'eman. Thank you, Avi. All right. So if I recall correctly, Bruchim Abayim, everyone. If I recall correctly, we essentially ended, I think, with halacha Gimal, maybe a little bit of Dalid. We did. I think we did a little bit of Dalid, and where we were talking about the mitzvah, right? What is Torah Sheba'al Peh? What is Gemara? What is what is Torah Shebichtav? And that the three are not synonymous with one another, and that more importantly, Torah Sheba'al Peh and Gemara are not exactly the same thing. And that what we said essentially is that the Torah Sheba'al Peh comprises what it is that what we will call the Ma'atikeh Shmu'ah, those who were designated in each generation to be able to give over the corpus of the oral Torah in the mitzvahs that was given over to Moshe Rabbeinu. That is what we call Torah Sheba'al Peh. And there is a finite aspect to Torah Sheba'al Peh. And this is why when Chazal say that a person has to learn Kol HaTorah Kullah, that they mean that that there's something called Kol HaTorah Kullah, and that a person has to learn all of that. And that doesn't mean that they have to learn everything that's ever been written at all times throughout all of Jewish history in order to be able to fulfill that. Gemara is something else, and we looked at that, and we saw how it is that Harambam talks about in Hilchot Talmud Torah, and that is the developments and discussions in Drashim and Sodot and Pardes and all of these kind of things that become part of the broader discussions and aspects and insights to the whole of Torah. And so we talked about also, I think it's important to kind of reorient ourselves, that we also spoke about three different modes of giving over the Torah. We talked about limidah, we talked about just the learning and teaching, we talked about the Kabbalah, that there was this receiving, and then we talked about the fact that there was misirah, right, that there was an actual giving over of Torah Sheba'al Peh. And so I just want to broaden that for a minute and make sure that we have an understanding of what it is. Excuse me, because what Harambam does, and let me see, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen here for this particular thing. Bear with me. Yeah, okay. Okay, so let's take a quick look again. All right, let's have a look. Yeah, so let's look. So it says, "V'hamitzvah shi pirusha Torah lo ketava." Right. So the pirusha Torah, which essentially we're calling Torah Sheba'al Peh, was not written down. Ela tzivaba, right? Moshe commanded this lazekenim v'Yehoshua v'shar kol Yisrael. Commanded this to the elders, to Yehoshua, to all of Israel. Shene'emar, as it says, we talked, by the way, last time, remember, we talked about tishmeru la'asot and the difference between that. Next, limeda Moshe Rabbeinu kula bebet dino l'shivim zkenim. So that's one aspect, right? Moshe teaches this to the Bet Din, essentially to the prototype Sanhedrin, the Bet Din Agadol of the 70 Zekenim, which, by the way, who can tell me where it is that we have this Bet Din established in the Torah? Where do we see them? Where do they come about? Why do they come about? Who can tell me?
By Moshe, when he was fed by Halot, no, with Eldad and Medad.
Yeah, well, it's all the same.
Yeah.
It's all the same in Yan, exactly. The Bet Din Agadol comes from a complaint for meat. That's the bottom line. This whole complaint, the complaint for meat, is the catalyst for all of this, for the entire thing. And so if you look at the Psukim in Ba'alotcha, very good, Mort. If you look at the Psukim in Ba'alotcha, the entire establishment of the Shivim Zekenim is interspersed with this whole issue that Moshe has with meat, of Moshe having a complete breakdown for all intents and purposes, because he can't find meat to give to the people. And I mean, one of the worst breakdowns in Moshe's career, to the point that he says, "Al ereh bara'ati horgeni naharog," because he doesn't have the groceries to make a barbecue. And out of this comes the establishment of the prototypical Sanhedrin. The reason why I say prototypical is because it doesn't function as a real Sanhedrin in Moshe's days. And why don't they? What do I mean by that? It doesn't function as a real Sanhedrin. Who can understand what I'm saying with that?
Because there's Moshe still.
Well, it's not just that Moshe. I mean, they're there not just as figureheads. How is it functioning? Who knows? How is it functioning?
Still never was.
Sorry?
There was no Sanhedrin. It was directly from Moshe at that point.
Who's saying that? Just so I know who's talking. Mechila? Is it
Hi.
Michael?
Hi,
Yeah. Who? David.
David Del Monte. Hi.
David Del Monte. Hi, David Del Monte. Long time. So no, it's not exactly that it was from Moshe. It's more important. It's more important, right there. Not more important. It's more specific. How is Moshe ruling? Let's talk about that. How is Moshe ruling on issues? How is Torah Sheba'al Peh manifesting while Moshe is alive? Through what mechanism?
Wasn't it that through
What?
in Parashat Yitro, it was Moshe Rabbeinu who actually created the judge system, and
Yes,
and
I understand, but that's not what
no,
I'm
but he
speaking
said,
of.
oh, is it not? Because he said that I only judge the big cases, and everything else will go through you.
Fine. How are the cases being judged? What is the mechanism of judgment? What is the machinery?
We ask God. What
Yes,
Moshe to God, God back to Moshe.
it's prophecy. It's prophecy. It's prophecy. So that's why it says that when these zkenim come in, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, "Ve'atzalti min haruach," right? I'm going to draw from the ruach of Moshe, which is essentially the ruach HaKodesh Nebuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, and give it to them. And that's what Eldad Medad was, correct? And Eldad Medad are not stopping with the Nebuah. There's a whole issue with that. Yehoshua comes and says, Adoni Moshe Kilaim. There's all of this issue. But what's happening, the reason I say that's prototypical is because the Sanhedrin, as Harambam points out in Hilchot Mamrim, the function of the Sanhedrin was to use the midot Torah nidreshet by him to look into Torah shebechtav to develop the novel responses to questions in law, not nivuah. As a matter of fact, after Moshe dies, nivuah is prohibited for that mechanism or for that purpose to derive law. Yeah, we have to use these midot, and these are our own iyun. And so Harambam in the Hakdamat to the Pirush Mishnah, which incidentally I have entirely recorded, Rav Sina. I have an entire series recorded on that. That's recent, not the old series. That's shaykh maybe to give a link to the group, because it's very good to have that in tandem with the Hakdamat to the Mishneh Torah. But essentially, what Harambam says over there is in the way that Yehoshua and Pinchas deduced law, or had to ultimately derive law, is the way that Ravina and Rabbi Asher derived law, which were the final Chachmei Horah of the Talmud. It's the same mechanism. Moshe is different. So that's why I'm saying that it was prototypical over here, but it is the prototype of the Sanhedrin and these Shivim Zkenim. More importantly for our purposes, Limidah. So notice that by the Shivim Zkenim, it doesn't say Kiblu. It just says Limidah, that Moshe Rabbeinu taught it to them. And that doesn't mean that it was an inferior teaching, chas v'shalom. It was a very full, robust, intact teaching. But there's a difference between what happens with the Shavim Zekenim and what happens, for example, with Elazar, Pinchas, Yehoshua. That what shloshtam kiblu mi Moshe. So the difference essentially is that the Lemidah, both Rav Kafeh writes this, and there's some of the Harunim that point this out in similar vein. That the idea of Lemidah means that they were given over the Torah Sheba'al Peh in teaching, and the Bet Din was essentially responsible for teaching Torah Sheba'al Peh to the next generation, and they basically formed the milieu, if you will, right? The context of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the nature of thought of the Torah Sheba'al Peh for each generation. So each Bet Din in its generation taught the Torah Sheba'al Peh, created the environment of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the thinking of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the deductions of Torah Sheba'al Peh in each respective generation. The Kiblu is an added element. It's a more deep and robust element. I'm having a little bit of trouble focusing because I hear that somebody is at my door, and God forbid any of my household should go to get the door while I'm in the middle of giving a hagura. So 1 second. Okay. So the kibilu is more. The kibilu it's as though this is literally a chefetz, right? This is something that is an actual object that we call Torah Sheba'al Peh, that is fully intact, that is given to them almost as though they're able to take it and put it in their pocket. That's what kibilu means. And the reason why that is significant is because these people that are the ones who were mekabel officially are the ones that are believed in ne'eman. They are faithful to state, kach kibalnu. This is what we received. And the minute that they say, these people that are ne'eman, this is what we received, done. There's no machloket. They are the ones that were entrusted and faithful. Not every single member of the Sanhedrin was a mekabel, and they didn't need to be. And I'll show you that they didn't need to be. So let's take a look at the Rambam in the Makor over here. Everybody sees? Okay, so let's look at the first halakha here. So this is halakha in Hilchot Sanhedrin, Perek Bet halakha Aleph. The Rambam here is talking about who can sit on the Sanhedrin, right? He says, En ma'amidin b'Sanhedrin, ben bigdola, ben biktana, ela anashim hachamim unbonim. Those, first of all, we only put intelligent, wise, and people of understanding onto the Sanhedrin. Whether it's a large Sanhedrin, a sub-Sanhedrin, a smaller Sanhedrin, right? If it is 23 or the full 70, they have to be people of understanding and intelligence. Muflagin bechokhmat Torah, they have to be extremely wise and well understanding and knowledgeable of the chokhmah of the Torah. Ba'ale de'ah merubeh. They need to be people that are not just understanding and wise, but ba'ale de'ah. They have to be people that are extremely intuitive, sensitive to the context and connection of the situations around them, which is what de'ah means, which I'm not getting into proving that at the particular point. What it does not say is that they have to be people that are ba'ale the Kabbalah or the ma'atikeh shmu'ah, or that they have to be the ones that were the mekablim. And we do see this elsewhere, right? We do see that Harambam talks about these people, but it isn't a criteria for the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, or it's not a criteria for the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin simply need to be people. It's not simple, it's a major thing, but they need to be people that are great wisdom and understanding of Torah. But it doesn't say anywhere that they have to be the ones that were mekabel ish mipi ish. Harambam talks about them elsewhere. Take a look at Hilchot Talmud Torah. He's just simply talking about, he says, look, our Chachamim, Gedolei Chachmei Israel, hayu mehem chotvei etzim, mehem shoavei mayim. We had lumberjacks that were Chachamim. We had water bearers, that were Chachamim, people that delivered water, water coolers. Those people that delivered the Chachamim did that. They still were involved in Talmud Torah. And some of them, says Harambam, Miklal ma'atikeh hashmu'ah ish mipi Moshe Rabbeinu. Some of them were actually these guys. Some of them were actually the people, the ones that were lumberjacks, right? Some of them were these people, the people that were ma'atikeh shmu'ah, that actually literally copied, right? They took the full corpus of Torah Sheba'al Peh as received and gave it over from one person to next, from the mouth of one to the next, each and every single generation, all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. They were also called Magidim. Take a look over here in Hilchot Shuvah. It says that a person who's kofer in the Pirush of the Torah is considered an apikoros, right? That he doesn't accept that there's a Pirush of the Torah. But beyond that, hamachish magideha, a person who is machish or who rejects those that are the Magidim, the ones who speak it. How do I know that the Magidim are the ones that I've referred to as the Matikeh Shmu'ah, the ones that receive it dor hardor ad mipi Moshe Rabbeinu? Because that's how the Rambam refers to them in Hilchot Mamrim, in Perek Aleph Halakha Bet. He says over here at the end, he says, first of all, Kol mi she'eno oseh ke'oratan, anybody who does not follow the Hora'ah, the rulings of the Bet Din HaGadol, are over in a lo ta'aseh, as it says in the Torah, lo tasur mikol hadavar asher yagidu lecha. You're not allowed to go against anything that they tell you. So then there's a pasuk, right? Al pi Torah asher rucha continues, says you have to do according to the Torah that they tell you. And the Rambam over here in this halakha goes through all the elements of what it is that the Bet Din HaGadol does or the Sanhedrin does. And one of the things is, he says, Al mishpat asher elu hadvarim shilmudu otan min adin. It talks about the pasuk. When it says the pasuk, Al hamishpat asher umru, it's quoting a pasuk there. That refers to anything that they derive from their learning, from the midot she'Torah nidreshet bahen, and they establish law. You have to follow that. And then mikol hadavar asher yagidu lecha. That's again a quoting of the pasuk. Kol hadavar asher yagidu lecha What does that refer to in the pasuk? Zoha Kabbalah, shekibilu ish mipi ish. Yagidu are the magideh hashmoah. They are the people that are ne'eman to tell you what was given over. And these people are special. These people are the ones that are entrusted and faithful, that when they say, kach kibalnu, this is what we accepted, it is law, it's not questioned. And Harambam writes that there's no argument, there's no machloket when these people say something. Once they say, kach kibalnu, the case is closed. There's nothing more to discuss. So that is the difference between here where Harambam is saying he taught the Zikenim and they learned from him. Sorry, just want to close that out so we can see what's happening over here. He taught the Zikenim and they learned from him, as opposed to Elazar, Pinchas, and Yoshua, that the three of them kiblu mi Moshe. They became the Ma'atikei Shmuah. They became the ones that were the Mekablim, the Magideha. They were the ones, Ish mipi Moshe Rabbeinu, that were responsible for giving this over, as they received it in full corpus, intact, completely faithful to be able to say, Kach kibanu. And then there's this extra added element that Yoshua, who talmido shel Moshe Rabbeinu, masar Torah sheba'al peh vetziva aleha, which is different than saying over here, ela tziva ba lezekenim. This tziva aleha, and Rav Kafich writes this beferush, and he brings makorot for this. The difference between tzivahu aleha and tzivaba up here is here specifically Moshe gives over the responsibility of the entirety of Torah Sheba'al Peh to Yehoshua, not just to say, yes, we did receive that, or yes, if there's a question, we can tell you that this was part of the Mesorah. Rather, Yehoshua is the only one that was responsible for actually giving it over intact to the next generation. That was his job, right? That was something that he had to do and to enforce it. And that is what it means over here, tzivahu aleha, on it specifically, as opposed to tziva ba, which is said for everybody, right? Over here, up there. Okay? So, any questions as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, I have a question, Rabbi.
Yes, go on.
If the Sanhedrin would make a decision, then that means that the one who was kibel in that generation could override the decision, or the Sanhedrin didn't make decisions in that
They
sense?
didn't make decisions. They wouldn't override the decision. The only time that a Mekabel would have some interface or issue with regards to the Sanhedrin is if the Sanhedrin was making a decision based on a misunderstanding or a flawed knowledge of the Kabbalah. And there, the Makabel could say, lo kibalnu kach. Kibalnu kach. You follow?
Yeah, but did that ability of the Mekabel to override, that
No.
went away, I guess. That's
The
my point.
only ability that they had to override was if there was a flaw in what people thought the Kabbalah was. But that didn't have an effect on new law, for example, that the Sanhedrin could develop as a result of situations that came up, or drashot that they saw a previous Bet Din make that they wanted to revisit for whatever reason. That didn't necessarily affect the Kabbalah, unless it did. And then in that case, the Mekabelim would say, "Lo kach kibalnu." It's not what the Kabbalah is. But it didn't necessarily have an effect or conflict with the Kabbalah. It could have been a developed and nuanced deen. And Rambam writes that beferush. Rambam says there were definitely halachot shelo that Moshe didn't express. He didn't explain. He didn't talk about because they weren't necessarily pertinent in his time. You follow that?
Would dinim of flying fall within that?
One second. Yoshua, do you understand that?
Yeah. I got
Okay.
it. Thank you, Rabbi.
Chavod.
I made my hair, by the way.
You?
He did his hair this week because last week you told him to get the camera on.
Did I? Oh, wonderful. I'm very proud of you. I appreciate that. Kol hakavod.
Would dinim of flying fall within that? At
Hadrat
all?
panim. What is it?
Would dinim of flying fall within that at all?
In what?
The category of halachot that weren't defined. It was kind of like left open.
The definitions of the dinim, it doesn't, every single din in the Torah, muflaim, mefurashim, mefursamim, doesn't matter what they are. Every single din in the Torah is open to the interpretation and what you call it, the I'm missing a word. Whatever, we'll use interpretation for them. The interpretation and the application of the Bet Din HaGadol. So they will always have the opportunity to be able to look at a mitzvah and say, this is what we understand the mitzvah's meaning and applying. Of course, not from the air. They have to use the midosh Torah nidreshet by him. But that's what I mean, that every single Bet Din, they are responsible. They create the milieu of the Torah Shebaal Peh of every generation. They're the ones that are discussing it and working through it and developing it and so on. To a certain degree, the Mekablim are quite static. That's why, they say about, for example, Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol, right? They talk about Rabbi Eliezer, who's Rabbi Eliezer in the story of the Tanur Shel Achnai, right? Anyway, so the Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol, he was a Shamoti. He was a Talmid of Bet Shammai, of Shammai. And he always says, his thing always says, Kach kibalti mirabotai. He didn't do a lot of innovation. Rabbi Eliezer, he didn't like to start innovating law. He just said, that is what I accepted from my rabbis, v'zeu. And so it's quite static, right? Which is fine. You need to have a corpus that is the source of things, that is the bedrock of things. That's not to say that there isn't innovation, development, and so on in the hands of the Sanhedrin later on, but you need to be able to have the core aspects and elements given over from one generation to the next, and they are the only ones that are ne'eman to be able to say that they would say, Kach kibal. Daniel Levy, did you have a hand up and took it down? You're okay?
Yeah, my question was actually going to be, was that the reason why so many people weren't Mekabel, why it was such a limited selection of people?
Yes. Not pashut at all. Absolutely. Okay, Ezra.
Where do we get all these, sorry.
Definitions?
I'm also missing, these definitions of what the roles are of these people or the Sanhedrin. I mean, the Sanhedrin, maybe you get it from the Gemara.
I'm doing the work for you, but essentially we look at it both from the extrapolations of Harambam's, everything that Harambam basically presented, which is why I'm giving you these sources for Harambam, that he uses these terms.
I'm saying, where does Harambam get it from?
So Harambam also gets it from the Talmud, because this is his understanding of how it is that these things developed in the Talmud. So whether it's the discussions of Bava Batra, Nachia Shiloni, which we'll see in a little bit, and what happened with him and what his responsibility was. But of course, Harambam is taking this from the teachings of the Hachamim that were given over, and what it is that he accepted. But it's his. That's what he always does. The Rambam always says that, right? The Rambam's always saying, "You don't know what I did for you. I took everything from everywhere, the bits and pieces, nooks and crannies, and I put them all together in a cohesive system and presented it to you." He does that all the time, especially in his Hakdamat Taharot in the Mishneh, and Seder Taharot. It's an unbelievable, by the way, if you haven't read Harambam's Hakdamat Seder Taharot, you must, because not only is it an absolute shocking masterpiece of work, he tells you there what it is that he did and why and how. And it's very important if a person wants to know the Rambam and understand the Rambam and hear who the Rambam is. It's an absolutely essential work that he's written to be able to fill a lot of it in. Ohad.
Is there something he's emphasizing when he says Shehu Talmido by Yeshua?
Yes. It's emphasizing because he's saying that's why he was the one that was mitzuveh to be Moser, to be the Mekabel of the Mesirah and to give it over. Because he was Lo Yamish Mitoch HaOhel, right? He was the one that was always there, that had the fullest experience of Moshe and the Torah. And so since he was Talmido, that's why he was the one that was chosen. Avi Garson.
So since you mentioned the case of Rabbi Eliezer and the Tanur, it was in my mind beforehand.
Yeah.
And so when the Bat Kol came down, wouldn't that be a manifestation or represent the Kabbalah and the Mesorah?
Excellent question. Precisely not. No. That's why there was a Mesirah and a Kabbalah. The Bat Kol was almost like a watered down Nevuah. That's the whole point of Lo B'Shamayim. The whole point of that entire story is we do not listen to the Shamayim with these things. Even as a Bat Kol, we don't listen to Shamayim with regards to these things. It's ours. It's given over into our hands. And that's the idea. Moshe Kibel, the same way. Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. Okay, so that's it. And from there on, it goes in that way. But we do not listen to Shamayim anymore. And that's the idea of the Nitzchuni Banai that happens generations later, that Eliyahu kind of affirms, on the story. Yeah?
Yeah.
Rachel?
Yeah, I was going to ask if there's like another meaning to kibel besides receives. Is it also that they like accept it in a certain way, that they take it in? Is there
It
like
means that they take it practically as an entity, right? That every aspect of an entity needs to be intact, and ki'ilu munach bekiso. They could take it and put it in their pocket, right? This is the entity. That's how it's given, and that's how essentially it's received. That's the best way that I can describe it. Okay, good. Weiter. We're not supposed to say that in Sephardi Habura, but nonetheless, don't tell anybody I said that. Don't tell anyone that I said that. Okay, I could lose my job. You said that. Okay, so we continue B'ezrat Hashem with the Kriya. So then it continues. It says, "Uzkenim rabim kiblu miYehoshua." There are many people, many zikenim that received from Yehoshua. V'kibel eli. Oops, keep doing that. It annoys me. I'm sorry. Yeah, whatever. Okay. Ukibel Eli minazkenim u'mepinchas, right? So Eli received from those kenim of Yehoshua and Pinchas. Shmuel kibel me'eli u'bedino. Now this is very interesting over here. This is the first time, and then it almost doesn't stop. All of a sudden, the bedin are mikablim. So the bedin, well, they weren't necessarily in Moshe's time, but here they are. So now they are not just lomdim, and not just the ones that are given over, they're mikablim, and they give over. So the bet din, and this is, by the way, bet dino means the bet din agadol, right? That's what it's talking about over here. So this is Eli ubet dino, and his bet din were the ones who gave over to Shmuel, and whom Shmuel received from. David kibel mishmuel ubet dino, and his bet din. Yes? Ahya Shiloni, so this is an interesting line. Ahya Shiloni, first of all, who's Ahya Shiloni? Ahya Shiloni is a Navi. Ahya Shiloni was the Navi who told Yarovam ben Nevat that he was going to be the Melech and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was going to take 10 Shvatim away from Rehavam, the son of Shmuel, Shlomo, right? And give it over to Yarovam ben Nevat. Ahya Shiloni, according to Chazal, was the one that signed an agreement with Yarovam ben Nevat that he was going to be quiet when Yarovam asked the people to worship Avodah Zarah. And he signed. He made Ahya Shiloni sign on this. Crazy stuff, yeah? But Ahya Shiloni was one of the greatest Nevi'im. It says in the Zohar, it's astonishing things, right? It says in the Zohar, in the Yadira Zuta, it says that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, on the day that he died, which is essentially what the Yadira Zuta is. It's all discussion on the day that he died. The day that he died, he said, I went and I saw my chelek in Olam Haba, and I saw that I was going to be judged by HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself and not one of the lower Batei Din. And he says that the judgment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Ra'avad Ra'avin. It's all Rachamim. All of it is mercy. And he said, and I saw that the one that I will be with is Ahya Shiloni. That's the person who Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said in the Zohar that he was going to be with. Astonishing. I'm not expounding on that. I'm just sharing that as a side point. So Ahya Shiloni is a very interesting individual, and he says Harambam Yotzei Mitzrayim Haya, because that's what Chazal say. Chazal say that Ahya Shiloni in Baba Batra, right? It says Ahya Shiloni, he was one of the Yotzei Mitzrayim. Ve Levi Haya. And he was a Levi. It's a big question why Harambam writes that he was a Levi. Because we also have a Mesorah that Shmuel was from the tribe of Levi, right? He was Kohen. Why does he say this? We're not 100% sure. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you what some of the opinions are, on this, but it says that he was a Levi. V'shama mi Moshe. And so obviously, if he was one of the Yotzei Mitzrayim, he heard from Moshe. But it's interesting because it says, Ahya Shiloni, Kibel mi David ubet dino. That Ahya Shiloni, his Kabbalah didn't really happen until David ubet dino and his bet din, and he was Yotzei Mitzrayim. But notice that it says Vehaya Katan bimei Moshe. He was a little boy at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, which still means this is a massive amount of time for a person to be alive. But the funny thing is nobody negates that. Nobody has an issue with the fact that he was alive for all of that time. Even the Ravad, anybody who has the actual Rambam in front of them and not this, I don't know, he probably do have the Ravad over here on the side, no? Mefashim? No, where is it? I can't believe. Wow. How? Ezra, you need to tell Safaria that there's no Ravad on the Rambam.
I'm on it.
Thank you. So the Ravad says, let me see if I have the Ravad. Maybe Rav Kafir, he brings the Ravad. Hold on a second. The Ravad essentially says that it wasn't that he was mekabel from the Bet Din of David. The Ravad has an issue with that. He says he was a member of the Bet Din of David. Yeah? Because the Ravad yitachen meod that he felt, how could it be that somebody like Ahya Shiloni, who was alive from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, is the mekabel of the Bet Din of David? Yeah? And one of the issues is because Harambam writes elsewhere that the one who was the Av Bet Din was always the greatest of the generation. So the Ravad has a bit of an issue with that. I want to just see the actual words of the Ravad. Here. Yeah. So Rabbi says, it's not true. What's not true? What's not true, according to the Ravad, is that he was the Mekabel from David, right? That he was not the head. He was one of the members of the Bet Din Shel David, which according to the Ravad is a greater kavod for Ahya Sheloni, that he should be not the head of the Bet Din, or one of the top members of the Bet Din, that he was rather a Mekabel. The question is, why does Harambam say all of this? Right? Why does he have to tell us Miyotzei Mitzrayim haya, Belevi haya, B'Shamam Moshe, V'ya Katan B'mei Moshe? A very simple reason. Because if Ahya Sheloni lived that long, what problem do we have? What should he not have lived through? Sorry?
Yetziat Mitzrayim.
What should he not have survived?
Ma'amad al Sinai.
Why wouldn't he survive that?
No, the
He's 40 years in the wilderness. He should have died.
Yes, he should. Thank you. Yeah, he should have died like everybody else did, because it says Lo nish'ar bahem ish. There wasn't one man that survived that. So some want to say that that's the reason that the Rambam writes V'levi haya. Because there's those who say, actually there's Gemara Baba Batra Kuf Chaf Aleph says that the Shevet Levi, the Gezerah didn't apply to them.
And he was a katan.
Yeah, he's a katan. He's not even a Nava.
So that actually, there are Haronim who say that that's really the issue. And that's still, it's kasher the Levi part, unless one wants to say both elements of it should come play in. But that is the reason why Moshe says katan haya. Why katan haya? Because he was under 20 years old at the time. And because he was under 20 years old, he wasn't part of the mitav, the gezerah, the meraglim, and the arba'im shana and the midbar. And so therefore he survived. And he did hear from Moshe. But according to Rambam, he was the mikabel. Okay. So he continues, and it says, Eliyahu kibel me'achya sheloni ubetino. I'm going to go fairly quickly through all of this, right? Ve'elisha kibel me'eliyahu betino. Notice, everything is betino. It's important. Kibel mi betino. Yehoyada kohen kibel me'elisha ubetino. Zechariah kibel me'yehoyada ubetino. This is Zechariah, maybe serious, major Zechariah. Ve'hoshea kibel me'Zechariah betino. Amos kibel me'Hoshea betino. Yishayahu kibel me'Amos betino. These are all the Nevi'im, yeah? Micha kibel me'Yishayahu betino. ויואל קיבל מיכה וביתינו, ונחום קיבל מיואל וביתינו, חבקוק קיבל מנחום וביתינו, וצפניה קיבל מחבקוק וביתינו, ירמיה קיבל מצפניה וביתינו, ברוך בן אליהו was the scribe of ירמיהו, קיבל מירמיה וביתינו, ועזרא וביתינו, קיבלו מברוך וביתינו. And Ezra, of course, we know was the one who established the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. Betino shel Ezra, which is why we're going to stop here and explain. we have to say, now we've gotten to a point where Purim happens. It's 1,000 years since they came into Eretz Yisrael, since they left Mitzrayim. There's already been a galut, and there's been a whole bunch of stuff that's occurred during this time. So we're coming back, and Ezra brings everybody back to Eretz Yisrael after the galut. Hem hanikraim. This Bet Din of Ezra is a special Bet Din. The special Bet Din. Hem hanikraim anshe knesset hagdola. They are the ones that we refer to as the men of the great assembly, the anshe knesset hagdola. They're the ones that wrote all of our tefillot, our kiddush, our havdalah, our brachot, our everything that we know. They wrote all of this stuff. Vehem, and who are they? Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. These are Nevi'im, right? These are not just Chachamim. These are Nevi'im. Daniel, important to recognize over here. This is a Sephardi moment. Everybody pay close attention. Notice that it is Daniel and not Daniel. Yes, the tzere is under the yod, not under the aleph. Everybody who says Daniel is mistaken. The name is Daniel with the dagesh and the yod. That is how it's supposed to be pronounced. Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, these are all great men. Nehemiah ben Hachaliah, Mordechai, Zerubbabel, right? You know all these guys. V'hirba hachamim, there were many hachamim that sat with them. This was a massive reunion of Torah, of Yisrael, of Din, Torah, of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, and everyone is sitting together now, essentially at this table. Tashlum me'ah ve'asrim zekenim. We have 120 elders sitting on this great assembly, right? That's what this is a great assembly. It's a massive assembly. Ha'aharon mehem, the last remnant of this great assembly, which carried over into the next generation, is Shimon HaTzadik, and we hear him in Pirkei Avot, Shimon HaTzadik, Meshireh Knesset Gedolah, right? That's how he's introduced to us in Pirkei Avot. He was among the last members of the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, who mikilal ha'me'ah ve'esrim. He is one of the 120 that are sitting at this table. V'kibel Torah sheba'al peh mipi kulan. Right, so he is receiving, he is a mekabel from all of these people, and he brings it over to the next generation. Hu haya kohen gadol ahar Ezra. He was a kohen gadol after Ezra Sofer. Good. Any major questions here? It's fairly straightforward. Daniel Levy.
If the Bet Dino were part of giving it over, why doesn't it say that they actually received it?
They did. In other words, the fact that it says they were mekabel, every Bet Din that was mekabel from one was the Bet Din that gave it over to the next.
Oh no, because it doesn't say that they received it. It says they only gave it over.
It says kiblu, mibeh Bet Dino, kiblu, mibeh Bet Dino. They received. Obviously, if they're receiving, they're giving it over. They had someone give it over, right?
Oh.
Understand?
Yeah.
Habakuk kibel menachum Bet Dino. So what did the Bet Din, how did they get it? From Yoel Bet Dino. That's shame. Yoshua.
Yeah. Why did Ezra have to change from 70 to 120? Wasn't 70 enough?
70, it's an excellent question. I like that question very much. 70 is, yes, of course, enough if I'm adjudicating law. But he was doing something much more over here, Ezra. What was Ezra doing? This is very important. I actually, wonderful question, Yoshua. I appreciate you asking that. Yeah. It's important to understand where we are in history over here. Yeah. And this is one of the reasons why Harambam pauses to tell you about, because he didn't have to, he could just say, they're called the Anshe Knesset and continue. He opens this up for you. He tells you who these people were and what they were about. He could simply just tell you, look, this is how the Mesorah happened, and you can do the research on your own, which he essentially does with everybody else. You could find out about everybody else by looking them up. He doesn't tell you about the life and history of Eliyahu and Elisha and all of these people. So the reason for that is very important. Ezra Sofer is coming on the tails of the first major galut that Israel experiences. Yeah? He is the one who recognizes that the Bet HaMikdash could actually be destroyed. We could actually be thrown out of our land. And you must understand that was unfathomable before it actually happened. Nobody believed that such a situation would actually occur. It's hard for us to understand that. But the way that I unfortunately express that to people today, to kind of frame it for them, which is unfortunate, but it happens to be the time of year. And by the way, Chodesh Tov, I think it's still Chodesh Tov. Right? It's still Chodesh Tov. The same way that is as difficult, and again, I'm not talking about what you're supposed to imagine and how strongly you can imagine it, but as difficult as it is for you to practically accept or recognize a reality that the Bet HaMikdash would be built on the spot that mosque is on now, is as crazy as it was for people to imagine the Bet HaMikdash could be destroyed when it was there originally. You follow what I'm saying? It was unfathomable. So it happens. And they get thrown off of their land. And the Harash and the Masger, right? I mean, the Nebuchadnezzar takes the elite of the people first, 11 years earlier, completely decimates the moral and intellectual infrastructure of the people. I mean, this is a massive, massive destruction. So they realize that Am Yisrael is vulnerable and that this could happen again. And that if it happens again, what we must do is create a portable system that they can take with them wherever they go. So what Ezra does over here is similar, although very different, similar to what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi does later on. What he does over here is he says, what I want to do is I want to bring the great minds of Israel together, not just as a body of adjudication and establishment of law. I want them to create, essentially, I mean, I'll explain what I mean. I don't say this for shock value, and you understand what I mean. I'll explain what I mean. I want to create Judaism, is essentially what Ezra does. And what I mean by that is it's very important for us to understand when we say Judaism, we don't realize the developments of it. Remember that let's take, for example, okay, Yom Kippur, right? What do you and I know of Yom Kippur? What you and I know of Yom Kippur is you spend all day in shul, you have a liturgy that's in your machzor, you follow what it's written. There are literally, I mean, for the Sfaradim, there are poems that were written in Spain in the 11th, 10th, 11th century. And that becomes Yom Kippur for us, right? That's Yom Kippur. We don't eat. But if you were to go back in time to the time of the Bet HaMikdash, Yom Kippur would be unrecognizable to you outside of the fact that you can't get a sandwich anywhere. It would be unrecognizable to you. There would be no machzor. There would be no standard liturgy out of core elements that perhaps people had. Maybe you bought a ticket to see, the Kohen Gadol doing the work in the Bet HaMikdash. He was the only man doing anything anyway on the day. Nobody else was allowed to do anything on that day. And if you weren't doing that, maybe you were getting married because the girls were in the fields and they were dancing, as the Gemara says in Ta'anit. It was Yom Kippur and Tu B'Av. And that's one of the things that occurred on Yom Kippur and Tu B'Av, is that there was people tried to get married. You were fasting, but otherwise the work was being done by the Kohen Gadol in the Bet HaMikdash. So where did our Yom Kippur come from? The Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. They created this scaffolding of Yom Kippur for all of us when we don't have a Kohen Gadol that's doing the Avodah in the Bet HaMikdash. So we read about the Avodah. What about Shabbat? What was Shabbat? Practically everything that we have that is what we know as being Judaism and Jewish didn't exist before the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah in the way that we know it. There was no Kiddush. There was, you said Shabbat Hayom, in whatever way you felt appropriate to say it. That was the mitzvah of the Torah, Zuchreu b'dvarim. You have to You have to mention that it's Shabbat, both when it comes in and when it's out. Hazal added, you have to Zuchreu al hayayin. You say it on wine. Not only say it on wine, this is what you say. There was no this is what you say. There were templates, at best. You follow what I'm saying here?
And we say that this is the beginning of the Rabbanan, mitzvah the Rabbanan?
No. It is not the beginning of the mitzvot Rabbanan. Remember, there's a difference between the mitzvot. That's the question. That's what Yoshua is pointing out. For mitzvot Rabbanan, a Sanhedrin is enough. This is more than that. They are creating an entire structure of life, of living, that is there to support Yisrael wherever we go. which includes, the beginnings of, what we know as Mishnah. These are the, very early elements of it. But essentially, the avodah that we know, that is essentially what we call Yahadut today. No such word like that is in the Torah. And notice that it's only for the tribe of Judah, which was all that was left by this time. Right? I mean, why isn't it called Israelism? How come it's called Judaism? I mean, that's what it should be called. It should be called Israelism. We're Israel. We're the nation of Israel. We're Am Yisrael. Why should our practice not be Israel ut? As instead of Yehudadut, right? It shouldn't. It should be Israelut, not Yahadut. But it isn't, because all that's left are these Judahs. And everybody was with them. So they create this Judah system for Galut. And that's why they need this elite group of people that are coming together to be able to structure this in this way. You follow that, Yoshua?
Yeah, I follow. I'm not like.
You don't sound very enthusiastic about it.
I'm not entirely convinced, because
what do you mean?
Like maybe I'm getting very concerned about the numbers exactly, like why 120. I don't know. Maybe since he was Kibel as well, Ezra was Kibel, right? So I'm guessing he was doing everything in accordance to what he received, like what God said. Like he never like made up anything on his own. Like this number of 120, I'm saying must have come from somewhere. Like he was Kibel, right? He couldn't change anything.
Yeah, I mean, but that doesn't necessarily be that the number 120 was something that he got from Sinai. That could be that's the number that ended up being the people and the diversity and the thinking that he felt was necessary to be able to come together and put together. But he puts them together. I mean, you have Nevi'im here. This is not just anybody. These are massive people. Look at who's there. I mean, this is like a dream team.
Yeah. With
so many different perspectives and nuance. So they're setting up this thing that, if you think about it, it's really astonishing, because they essentially created a system that protected and kept Am Yisrael in a 2,000-year galut. It's astonishing.
Yeah, it's genius.
It's unbelievable. So yes, that's what it is. That's what it is. At least that's my suggestion to you as to what it is. But that's definitely what it is. Ken? Bet Dino shel Ezra. Oh, sorry, Ohad. Sorry. Go ahead.
I have a question, but just to clarify on that point, Rabbi is saying is that it's not, the 120 is not for the judicial power, but more for the creative and brain power that they're given.
Correct. Not only that, it's not just creative brain power. It is the establishment of what we call Yahadut, right? Or essentially the nature of the entire thing. It's also a profound endorsement, because it's not just the Bet Din. It is this unique body that was like once in history gathered together, and so therefore it creates this very profound endorsement and base for what it is that they created. You follow? So yes, it is the brain power and creativity, but it's more than that. It's the weight of it that endorses and empowers it, of this group, which is unmatched.
And also by the V'hu haya Kohen Gadol Achar Ezra, why is that necessary to teach us? And going back to the V'levi haya, and he was a katan, what Rabbi is saying is good, but why is that also necessary to teach?
I don't know why Levi haya is a reason. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I think that the katan haya is the point that makes that he didn't die. I do not. I have yet to see an explanation as to what Levi haya is coming to us. I don't have an answer for that. I don't have an answer.
Can I ask a question?
Who's I? Yes, David. Yes.
Hi. Yeah. Sorry. Just I know that like the Anshe Knesset Agdola fixed the tefillot, but where do we know that they fixed like kiddush on wine?
Same Gemara that says that they fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All there.
Yeah. It's all there. It says kiddushim, havdalot, brachot, all of that.
As in, was it the nusach or the actual?
The major template. There are elements of nusach that are different, as you see. There's words here and words there that are different among the various kehilot, but the core template, is there. And the core template is what Rambam wrote it all down. So we have he wrote a sidur. So we
No,
have.
and I agree on the nusach. I'm just asking. You mentioned that it was on wine and things like that.
The fact that you have to say kiddush on wine.
Yeah.
That's a gezerat hachamim. That's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. I'm not saying that was the kiddush, the liturgy of the kiddush was established by that.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Antignos ishsocho. We have 5 minutes. And so this will be the last halakha for now. Antignos ishsocho. We're going to run through this very quickly. It goes on. These are all the time of the early Chachmei Tanaim and the Zugot. Antignos ishsocho bedino kibidu mimoshimon tzadiku bedino. Yosef ben Yorezer ishtiradav. Yosef ben Yohanan ishushalayim bedinam kidu antignos bedino. Again, everybody ends with bedino. Yeshua ben Parachia bedino kibidu Yosef Yosef bedinam. Yehuda ben Tabai v'Shimon ben Shatach ubedinam kidu Yeshua ben Tabai bedinam. Shmaya v'Abtalion gerei tzedek. And he makes a point of that, right? Because Shmaya and Abtalion were the leaders, the Nasi and the Abedin. I didn't mention this over here because Rambam really doesn't go into the details of it over here, so it's not. He obviously doesn't see that it's pertinent. But something happens here, okay? Something happens here that's very, very important, and that is that there are 2 elements of leadership. So there's the Nasi and the Abedin, and the Mishnah explains this, right? What ultimately that there was this shared leadership between them, and that in each generation you had this pair that led. And so it goes through. The interesting thing is, in the generation of Shemai and Avtalon, they were both Gerei Tzedek. Both of them. And they were, Hem Kiblu Yehuda b'Shimon Betinam, and they were the Rebbes of Hillel. And so Hillel says that he used to say things. This is a very interesting, I mentioned this before, but it's an interesting Mishnah, because Hillel says that he used to speak with the accent of his Rebbes, of Shmaya and Avtalion, and they had funny accents because they were foreign, because they were Gerei Tzedek. So he says that they would say in Tzedek instead of hin with a he. And so he would say that. He would say in because that's how he heard from his Rebbe. Yeah. So I do that because I say whatever I pronounce because that's how I heard Hacham Ovadia say it. Even though he says it differently than everybody else says it. So like Hacham Ovadia, they talk about sirtut. Sirtut is, the lines that have to be made in the mezuzah and the tefillin, well, the tefillin, but the mezuzot, yeah, that you have to write on, and we're in the Sefer Torah, that you have to have these lines carved into the cloth. Hacham Ovadia used to call it shirtut, not sirtut. So that's how I say it, because that's how he said it. Or he says, instead of Vlad, like a child that's born, he used to say Valid, not Vlad. So that's part of it. That's part of Mesorat. That's how you heard it from your Rav. That's the way you should say it. Or they talk about the Nisyuve de Chelba. Most people call it Nisyuve. He said Nisyuvi de Chelba. So there's all things that you learn from your Rav. That's part of the Mesorah, the Lashon of the Torah Shabbat Peh, of how it is that they pronounce it. In any case, Hillel v'Shamai betinam kibdu mishmaya v'avtiyom betinam. Here a major shift happens. And we do not have time tonight to go into the depths of what it is that the shift happens. This is what we will do next time. When is next time, by the way, Sina?
2 weeks' time.
Okay, so that's terrible. That's not terrible. All right, so something happens over here. Watch. Hillel v'Shamai betinam kiblu mishmaya v'avtiyom betinam. Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai, which is the time Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai is the one in his generation that Bet Midrash was destroyed, right? So shifts are happening here. Rabban Shimon ben Oshel Hillel kiblu mihilelu betino, and then all of a sudden it goes off in discussing the students of Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. Hamisha talmidim hayu lo Rabbi. I just want to read it with you now, and then we'll go into more detail of it next time. Hamisha talmidim hayu lo Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. Vehem gedolei hachamim shekiblu mimenu. He had 5 students. They were great hachamim that received from him. Ve'eluhem. And here they are. Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Yosef HaKohen, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanyahu, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef, Kibel me Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol. What's missing? Yosef Aviv Ger Tzedek haya. Rabbi Shimon Yishmael, Rabbi Meir ben Ger Tzedek, Kiblu me Rabbi Akiva. The Gam Kibel Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yishmael. What is going on? What's missing? And what's changed?
Kiblu.
Betinam.
No Bet Din, exactly. Where's the Bet Din? Something happened. Well, the destruction of Bet Midrash happened. Where is the Bet Din? We know that there was a Bet Din. There was a galut of the Sanhedrin, but they're not mentioned. So we're going to have to understand that next time. All of a sudden, the Bet Din disappears for a while. What happened during this time? Why am I telling about the 5 students? What happens after Hillel and Shammai, which the Gemara says, after Hillel and Shammai, nitraba machloket. Machloket started going out, it started blowing up. You have people, look, all of a sudden they're receiving, look at the receiving over here. Rabbi Ishmael, Rabbi Meir, Ben Gerat said, Kiblu, Rabbi Akiba, Begam Kibel, Rabbi Meir, Haverav, Rabbi Ishmael. It's getting less neat all of a sudden. Yeah? Okay? So we're going to have to delve into that next time to understand where did the Bet Din go and how is there splitting of things that are going on. And we know that machloket occurs after Hillel and Shammai. Why? What's going on? Why are things developing, changing over here? To be continued. Okay? I hope to see everybody Bezrat Hashem next week. Any other announcements that are important? Okay. Shenizke b'nehamat Zion and Yiratzon that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sheyafoch the yamim, these difficult days for us, miyagon, the simcha, and from Ever to Yom Tov, and we should see the rebuilding of the Bet Midrash b'mera b'yameinu amen. Good night.
Just to quickly check. Everybody, Rabbi, no time for any questions?
Okay, if there's anything pressing. I left it on a thing that I
said.
No,
there's no raised hands.
Yeah. Well, Ohad, you have a raised hand. I don't know if that's a residual raised hand or that's a new raised hand.
No, that's old.
Okay, it's residual. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
No. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.